This is Land of Havilah, Psalm 81. It's 16 verses. It's a psalm of celebration. There are no pressing issues, no pleas for help, no prayers, just celebration on the part of the man speaking. And there's also God speaking, expressing his desire that his people would listen to him always so that things will go well for them. The speaker switches back and forth without warning between God and man. Man speaks first, then God, then man again, then God again. We have to figure out who's who as we read. We'll read it all, then comment. Verse 1. For the chief musician on an instrument of Gath, by Asaph. Sing aloud to God, our strength. Make a joyful shout to the God of Jacob. Raise a song and bring here the tambourine, the pleasant lyre with the harp. Blow the trumpet at the new moon, at the full moon, on our feast day. For it's a statute for Israel, an ordinance of the God of Jacob. He appointed it in Joseph for a testimony when he went out over the land of Egypt. I heard a language that I didn't know. I removed his shoulder from the burden. His hands were freed from the basket. You called in trouble, and I delivered you. I answered you in the secret place of thunder. I tested you at the waters of Meribah, Selah. Hear, my people, and I'll testify to you, Israel, if you would listen to me. There shall be no strange god in you, neither shall you worship any foreign god. I am Yahweh your God, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Open your mouth wide, and I'll fill it. But my people didn't listen to my voice. Israel desired none of me. So I let them go after the stubbornness of their hearts, that they might walk in their own counsels. Oh, that my people would listen to me, that Israel would walk in my ways. I would soon subdue their enemies and turn my hand against their adversaries. The haters of Yahweh would cringe before him, and their punishment would last forever. But he would have also fed them with the finest of the wheat. I'll satisfy you with honey out of the rock. Comment verse 1 is a psalm by Asaph, the musician and prophet of David's time, 1 Chronicles 25:1. Jacob in verse 1 are all the descendants of the man Jacob, also known as Israel. Jacob, Israel, same person and same nation, descended from that person. In verses 1 and 2, rejoice that God is our God. In verses 3 and 4, blow the trumpet at the new moon, at the full moon, on our feast day, for it's a statute in Israel and an ordinance in Jacob. It was a statute and ordinance in the law of Moses that they should blow trumpets at those times. Numbers 10:10. The trumpets are celebratory in this psalm. God's presence and support is cause for celebration. In verse 5, he went out over the land of Egypt. I heard a language I didn't know. It's also translated, I heard a voice I didn't know. In other words, God went out over Egypt, saw their condition when the Israelites were slaves, and issued a command in verse 6 to remove the burden from Israel's shoulders and free their hands from the basket, meaning deliver them from the servitude of bearing burdens and carrying things in baskets, to free them from slavery. It was a language or voice the people of Israel didn't know because they weren't familiar with God. Their forefathers Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob knew him, but they had not experienced him. He was the voice they didn't know, or he spoke a language they didn't know, because they misinterpreted all his good intentions for them. The concept of a good and caring God being present with them was something that generation never did learn. They couldn't get it through their heads that God was good and was taking care of them. In verse 7, you called in trouble, meaning Israel called to God when they were in Egypt. Exodus 2:23. And God answered in the secret place of thunder, meaning he answered in power. Then in verse 7, I tested you at the waters of Meribah, end quote. Meribah was in the desert, Exodus 17. Israel had no water there until God provided it. After all that great deliverance from Egypt, God let them get a little thirsty to see if they had learned anything about him, to see if they would trust him, seeing what he had already done for them, or if, on the other hand, they would complain against him in their thirst. They complained, accused him of trying to kill them, and they failed the test. In verses 8 and 9, God's encouraging them to follow the first commandment, you shall have no other gods before me, Exodus 20, verse 3. He issued a total of 613 laws through Moses, but from the days of Egypt to the days of the Babylonian captivity, Israel failed to keep even the first law. They kept worshiping other gods. In verse 10, if they'll take him to be their only God, they can open their mouths wide and he'll fill it. He'll give them an abundance of blessings, according to all the blessings and benefits he promised in Leviticus 26, blessings they would hardly be able to contain. But unfortunately, in verse 11, my people don't listen to my voice. They desired none of me. It was worse than the tragedy of Romeo and Juliet, that they rejected their God. All those blessings down the drain and heaps of misery instead, which is what they got for walking in their own counsel in verse 12. In verse 13, God says the same to us today. Oh, that my people would listen to me, as he expressed it in Deuteronomy 5:29. Oh, that there were such a heart in them that they would fear me and keep all my commandments always, that it might be well with them and with their children forever." End quote. In verse 16, he wants to feed us with the finest wheat and satisfy us with honey from the rock. Honey from the rock's a metaphor for God being able to surprise us in the darkest situations with the finest provisions out of nowhere. Psalm 82 is next.